how will cities be more livable and sustainable in the future? I want to talk about Los Angeles as a paradigm for that. LA's defining feature is its land. It's different than other American cities in that the land was designed for enjoyment, built for places that's dedicated to open space with lots of play areas. Unlike older American cities, which have plenty of enclosed spaces for creating for work, Los Angeles is a city of open land, of parks and vistas and nature. This kind of open city, I believe, is a model for the 21st century, which is livable and it's ideal for the new forms of work and for living that architects are creating. But LA is a place that is most of the time beautiful with calm conditions that are then interrupted by severe natural disasters, as you probably have seen in the past several weeks. These kinds of events will accelerate with climate change. I originally planned to talk today about mobility because car traffic is a chronic problem in the City of Angels. Instead, I've been studying the threats of climate because I feel it's an immediate existential threat to cities. I believe it's more urgent to address the threats that come with climate change than transportation per se. We want to address climate change in a new way. We want to think of it not in a form of reaction that would create defensive barriers, but rather as an opportunity to transform the city to a place that would be more livable, that would be more enjoyable, like the prototype in history of Los Angeles has presented. The answer to the proverbial question, what are the three most important things in real estate? Location, 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 is a perfect history of the making of Los Angeles. LA made locations. LA made places that would be desirable for both civic and for private life. From the very beginning, the city was planned by making the land. In the downtown, they were transformed into civic spaces. This eventually turned into stepped platforms where most of the cultural institutions are today. The technique of cut and fill of land has been used throughout the city, across the city, in different ways. For example, with its infrastructure. In the late 1800s, there was a grand project to bring water to Los Angeles through a series of aqueducts that would then the water would then be stored into reservoirs like this one that you see in Hollywood. They were built by excavating and trenching the land and then creating dams. In other areas, hundreds of thousands of tons of soil were removed and regraded where there were once farmlands in order to create these types of water bodies using, amazingly, horse-drawn tools. As the city has grown, these reservoirs have gone from being utilitarian infrastructure on the outskirts to being urban amenities that have parks, meadows, estuaries, and recreational trails. But again, there's a cycle of beauty and disaster that is chronic to Los Angeles. After severe floodings in the 1930s along the LA River, which damaged streets and homes, the US Army Corps of Engineers used more advanced construction techniques, like you see here, to channelize the river to protect from floods. This is the river today. There's a bike path that runs through it, and there are multiple initiatives, both by the local government and nonprofit organizations, to create open spaces for recreation along its 51-mile path. These technologies of land grading that were used with LA's infrastructure were also used in LA's landmarks. For example, they started literally in cases like the Hollywood Bowl of marking the land, of carving the land, where the hillside here was sculpted into a cradle for the audience. Given the climate, it was left on open air and is set against the Hollywood Hills. Dodger Stadium is the home to LA's baseball team, and this was a massive, massive excavation process. You can see here the scale of operations from the size of the cars and the tractors that were used. The design of it is ingenious. The stadium is lowered into the ground to create a more intimate setting, and then the land is used for structural support for the stadium seating. And here you see the nest-like urban atmosphere that this creates. The Getty Center also used land transformation techniques to provide access, public access to the top of hills. And then here it is today, as you might know it. Like a moth to a flame, the closer landmarks get to nature, the greater the risk there is to climate change. This urban sensibility to make land to be enjoyed comes face to face with the major sources of danger in the city. And I want to say, in thinking about these fires, that land use, the economics of land, and climate change come and collide in conditions like this. From the intensifying wildfires that are caused by drought cycles that will increase in frequency, to the ensuing flooding and mudslides from unpredictable heavy rains. My colleagues and students in the urban strategy studio at UCLA are looking at ways in which we can design the land to confront the threats of climate change. Rather than propose to limit access to these really beautiful areas in Los Angeles, the goal is to use these engineering techniques that have been used in the past to make spaces that are going to be more desirable for the people who live there on a day-to-day basis. Here are a few approaches that we're developing. In the 1930s, the Olmsted brothers, the son of the great landscape architect Frederick Olmsted Jr., who was the landscape architect of Central Park, created a network of open spaces for Los Angeles. And you have to remember that this plan was done at a time when there was very little built-up area in the city. So the idea was that you see in green was to create parks, trails, and transportation lines that would be a network that would crisscross the city from west to east. And in that way, he was thinking that a city that lacks an urban culture could produce an urban culture that would be centered around landscape and open air. And it's this legacy that I find inspiration in. This foresight that they had is something that, as an architect, I think could be built upon in the 21st century. So this is one of the proposals that we're developing that's inspired by the Olmsted Plan. It's a series of open areas that start along the shoreline of the Pacific that run up a tributary of the LA River down into downtown, and then up the LA River towards the mountains, and then along the Santa Monica Mountains back down to the Pacific. This would largely be using government land and incorporate existing parks and infrastructures like the reservoirs that you've seen. It would also include all of LA's ecologies, the shoreline, river, plains, hills, and also would develop incorporatable industrial zones. It would protect the city from climate change by producing a fire break along the mountain ridge. And it would also produce a different kind of urban experience. Like moving through Berlin along the river, it would create an experience that would be entirely different than what you would see by either car or by train. And for Angelenos, something like this would be a unique way to reimagine their city. It would also be a way to produce a flood barrier along the LA River and to return parts of the LA River to a riparian zone. This proposal that's being developed is in response to damages that are caused by fires. Fires spread through canyons because that's where the wind has the most velocity. So you see here in these areas, where the canyons are the lowest and the hillsides is where the wind gains velocity and burning embers travel up through the canyons and cause fires to spread. The proposal is to intervene into these natural canyons by creating fingers that would also extend into the city. The dry brush that would be removed from these areas and replaced by fire-resistant landscaping. That would establish a fire break that would prevent fires from spreading across and down canyons. In the meantime, it'll give residents and visitors even greater access to open space for hiking and leisure activities. Believe it or not, most of Los Angeles lies above either a fault line or a liquefaction zone. And so you see the areas that are in yellow here. These are all areas that are considered high-risk earthquake zones. This proposal encourages development in neighborhoods that are outside of earthquake zones that are also at low risk for fire. It calls for, in the bars, higher density along commercial and mixed-use zones. And the idea would be that by encouraging development to happen in this area, including housing, it would mean that it would reduce the distance and frequency of car travel. You can see an imaginary proposal for an area in Hollywood where the area that would be used would include 100% landscape of the property area. The park would be lifted so that there would be views from the park, and then buildings would be placed on top of the lifted park for access. In other words, we want to use these tools for making land to make spaces that we think would be new kinds of urban experiences. As cities around the world face the threats of climate change, can they be more preventive as well as constructive in the way that cities are planned? By using land, we can make cities that will endure climate change. But we have to work at a massive urban scale, and not to realize fantastic urban utopias, but rather we need to work at this scale for the very survival of the city. These won't have to look like defensive barriers, which these tools have been used to do in the past, but rather these very same tools could be used to make parks and rivers and hills that in the end will make our cities more pleasurable to live in. Thank you.